At the checkout counter, a middle-aged man stood frozen, his voice thick with restrained fury. Not the kind that erupts in yelling, but the kind born from powerlessness that had fermented into raw frustration. He stared hard at the employee behind the register, his voice low and hoarse, his voice laced with disbelief. "There's an old man. He's been standing in the parking lot for 20 minutes, alone. His hands are shaking. Has no one seen him?" The entire store fell silent. The air shifted, as if someone had pulled a string tight across the room. People slowly turned to look at each other, then, as if drawn by an invisible force, their eyes settled on the glass entrance, where outside, a fragile figure moved slowly beneath the soft curtain of rain. Out in the lot, Mr. Walter was struggling to hoist a massive bag of dog food from his shopping cart into the trunk of his car. The bag looked almost bigger than his own frail frame. His arms trembled in waves, but he never uttered a single complaint. He didn't ask for help. He just kept trying, each attempt driving his legs lower toward the wet pavement, like the weight wasn't just in the bag, but in the life he now carried. Customers walked by. No one stopped. Everyone seemed in a rush, eyes fixed straight ahead as if nothing outside their path existed, not out of cruelty, out of habit. But this isn't just a story about an old man struggling in the rain. This is a story about why no one stopped. Inside the store, Raymond stood still, watching through the glass. Most didn't know it, but he was the man who had once built this place. Brick by brick, dream by dream. The store had once been the culmination of his life's work, and now he stood inside it as a stranger, unseen and forgotten. No one recognized him. No one spoke to him. Behind the counters, staff exchanged uneasy glances, uncertain of what to do. Finally, a young man named Ethan stepped forward, voice stammering, uncertain. "I'll go check on him." "Right away." Raymond said nothing more. He turned away slowly, letting out a sigh that came from somewhere deeper than his lungs. But his eyes never left the figure outside. Mr. Walter was still hunched over, still trying. Each time he bent down, his hands trembled harder. His small body cast a long shadow across the wet concrete, fragile and haunting. In a far corner of the store, another man stood silently. Jackson. His hands gripped the handle of his shopping cart, knuckles pale, but his eyes were locked onto the scene outside. Unlike the others, his gaze carried something different, something that stirred slowly from within. It wasn't pity, it was something deeper. A memory. Because Jackson wasn't just watching Mr. Walter, he was seeing himself 30 years ago. He remembered a winter colder than most, when he was a young man working his first job, pushing carts through thick snow with bare, raw hands, breath turning to frost on his lips. No one had helped him then. No one had looked up. The cold that cut through his skin wasn't what stayed with him. It was the cold that settled in his chest, the silence of being unseen. That memory hit him like a wave, unexpected, sharp, undeniable. It landed with weight. Outside, Mr. Walter was still cradling the heavy bag of dog food in both arms, his knees beginning to wobble beneath him. He didn't ask for help, he just kept trying. Maybe he believed that if he kept going, someone would eventually notice. Or maybe he'd long stopped believing that. Jackson held his breath. Then, without a word, he released the cart, pushed it gently aside, and took his first step toward the door, not just with his body, but with a heart that had once been broken by that same silence, a heart that now refused to let someone else carry the same weight alone. He walked out, didn't hesitate, didn't look back. The rain had eased, but the pavement was still slick and cold. The air hung damp and heavy around them. Mr. Walter, hunched, still fought with the same oversized bag. His thin jacket was soaked at the shoulders, darkened from the drizzle. Every movement he made was slow, shaky, as though he were lifting more than just groceries, but the invisible burden of aging, solitude, and a world that had begun to look right through him. Jackson approached gently, steps light so as not to startle. He placed a hand on the old man's shoulder and said softly, "Let me give you a hand, sir." Mr. Walter flinched, ever so slightly. His body flinched as if it hadn't been touched in weeks, as if he'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Then he slowly turned, and in his pale eyes something sparked. He gave a small, tired smile. It was the kind of smile that carries an entire story behind it. "Thank you," he said, voice rough and catching. "These bags don't get any lighter as I get older." Jackson carefully took the bag and lifted it into the trunk, treating it like it was more than just dog food. And maybe it was independence, or pride, or simply something that had become too heavy to carry alone. Mr. Walter tried to steady his breath, even as it caught in his chest. "I come here every week, always by myself. No one comes with me anymore, but I've gotten used to it." Jackson froze. Gotten used to it. Those words hit him harder than anything else that day. Since when did people have to get used to being invisible? He didn't respond. He just closed the trunk gently. From the back seat, a small dog poked its head out through the window, calm, alert, loving. "Milo," Mr. Walter said, and his voice warmed. "He's the reason I still come out here every week." Milo wagged his tail gently, eyes shining, not barking, just watching his owner with the kind of understanding only time and love could build. "Since my wife passed," Mr. Walter added, voice soft and low, "it's just been me and him. He's my friend, my home." Jackson didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Because some stories don't ask for advice or sympathy. They ask to be heard, to be acknowledged. And that was enough. Mr. Walter slowly climbed into his car, his hand resting gently on the steering wheel. Then he turned, his voice as soft as a passing breeze. "You're a good man, but not everyone is like you." The car rolled forward, inching out of the parking lot at a quiet pace. Jackson stood still, watching it disappear from view. His chest tightened. Something inside him cracked. Not with a loud break, but a quiet, irreversible shift, the kind of fracture that doesn't heal the same way again. He turned and walked back into the store. No one noticed that he'd stepped outside, just like no one had noticed Mr. Walter struggling under the rain. Everything inside remained untouched. Shelves were still neatly stocked. The beeping of scanners continued in steady, lifeless rhythm, and the air, once familiar, now felt oddly sterile, like a place that had been organized too perfectly to feel human anymore. Jackson paused in the dry goods aisle, pretending to browse a few items, but his eyes were scanning the store, quietly observing every subtle movement, every moment that passed unnoticed. Ethan, the young employee from earlier, had returned to his station. He offered a faint nod toward Raymond, a silent apology, before quickly slipping away. Near the dairy section, an elderly woman was pushing her cart slowly, her hands trembling slightly. No one seemed to notice. And suddenly, Jackson understood. The place he once built to serve people had started erasing the very people it was meant to serve. Here the busyness didn't bring life, it created distance, and sometimes that distance was the very thing that made an old man with trembling hands or a loyal dog named Milo feel like they didn't belong in the world anymore. Jackson continued walking slowly through the aisles. On a wall near the frozen food section, a large sign stood out in bold letters. "Efficiency is honor." Below it was a chart. Metrics for service speed, peak hour performance, upselling rate, daily revenue targets. Not a single line mentioned people. Jackson stopped in front of the staff scheduling board. A female employee stood there, staring at the sheet. She sighed, then turned to walk away with a slight limp in her step. One hand clutched an ice pack pressed to her wrist. No one asked if she was okay. Down the hall, a young girl, clearly new, was helping a customer grab an item from a high shelf. As soon as she returned, her manager scolded her in a harsh tone. "Don't leave your station for more than 30 seconds, got it?" She nodded quietly, said nothing, and returned to her post. Jackson watched, unmoving. What he saw now wasn't just product placement or store flow. It was people being swallowed whole by one thing: procedure. At the self-checkout station, an elderly man was fumbling with the touchscreen. His fingers shook as he tapped, making 3 errors in a row. The machine let out a loud, jarring alert. No one came to assist. He stepped back, murmuring to himself, "Sorry, I'm not used to this kind of thing." In the distance, 2 young employees were too focused on inventory, eyes glued to their tablets. One of them glanced over at the old man, then just looked away. Jackson watched the man silently push his cart out of the way. His shoulders slumped, not from frustration, but because Jackson understood. The pain didn't come from the machine. It came from the eyes that never lifted to see him. Every quiet corner of this store whispered something to Jackson now. The problem wasn't that employees lacked kindness. The problem was they had been taught to look away. He paused near the exit. Beside the sliding glass doors was an old sign, lightly dusted over. "Customers are the heart of the store." Jackson wiped it clean with the palm of his hand. Dust rose into the warm afternoon light filtering through the glass. Just beneath the sign sat a wooden bench, worn and empty. No one used it. An older employee walked by, hesitating for just a moment as if he considered sitting, but then he glanced around, lowered his head, and kept walking, his shoulders just a little more hunched than before. Jackson watched him, and every small movement told a much larger story. A store can be clean, it can be organized, it can run like a machine. But if the people inside grow silent, withdrawn, and numb, then it's no longer a place to live, it's just a place to function. And now Jackson finally understood. Years ago, he used to say, "Customers are the heart of the store." But maybe that heart had stopped beating a long time ago. He turned, walking toward the back of the store, toward the employee-only storage area. There he spotted Ethan, the young employee, lifting heavy boxes onto a shelf. Sweat dotted his forehead, but his eyes looked away when Jackson approached, hesitant and unsure. Jackson stopped, his voice calm and gentle. "Do you know who that man in the parking lot was?" Ethan hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Yes, sir. His name's Walter. He comes every week, always by himself." Jackson studied the boy's face. He didn't judge him. He simply asked, "Have you ever helped him?" Ethan lowered his head. "I wanted to. I really did, but we're told not to leave our stations. I was afraid I'd get written up." Jackson stood quietly. No scolding, no disappointment. Just a long, thoughtful look at a young man caught between what's right and what's required. The problem isn't a lack of compassion. It's that compassion is being quietly suffocated by the very system it serves. Jackson stepped away, heading down a narrow hallway that led to the break room. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, he could hear the quiet rustle of paper and the faint sigh of exhaustion. He stood there for a moment, listening. Then, gently, he knocked. A middle-aged woman looked up from her seat, sipping from a plastic water bottle. "Sorry to bother you, I'm a customer," Jackson said softly. "I just have a quick question." She nodded and motioned for him to come in. "Do you know Mr. Walter, the older man with the little dog?" She let out a weary sigh. Her eyes softened. "Of course. Anyone who's worked here long enough knows him. But we're not allowed to help. One time I went out to help him carry his bag and the manager called me in right away. Said if everyone started acting on their own, who would cover their post? Jackson nodded slowly. His eyes drifted to a nearby bulletin board filled with policy rules. One line stood out in bold. Do not leave your station for any personal reason. Now he understood. It wasn't that people didn't want to help. It was that they were afraid to. Jackson said nothing more. He left the break room and walked straight toward the manager's office, a glass-paneled room overlooking the front of the store. Inside, Greg, the store manager, was typing something into his laptop, jotting down numbers. Jackson nodded. Greg looked up and smiled politely. Hi there, how can I help you? Jackson kept his voice even. I just wanted to ask, is it true that employees here aren't allowed to help customers in the parking lot? Greg paused briefly, then replied in a practiced tone. Well, it's not technically forbidden, but we have clear guidelines. Employees must remain at their assigned stations. Leaving without notifying management is considered a procedural violation, even if it's to help someone like Mr. Walter. Greg shifted slightly in his chair, gripping his pen. We've never had a formal complaint about it. Jackson met his gaze. There are things, he said slowly, that if we wait for a complaint, it's already too late. He didn't wait for a response. He turned, walking away, back toward the produce section. Back to the place where, years ago, he had first arranged crates of red apples with his own 2 hands. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the arched skylight overhead, casting golden streaks down each aisle. The shadows danced across polished floors like faded memories resurfacing. What Jackson had just heard wasn't a violation. No one had broken any rules, but no one had done the right thing either. He reached out and gently touched an apple. Cold, smooth, flawless, just like the system operating this store. Efficient, precise, and soulless. His thoughts drifted back to Mr. Walter, to those eyes, worn down by years of being overlooked, to the dusty bench beneath a forgotten mission statement. And then, like a knife slipping beneath the skin, a silent question pierced his thoughts. Did I create this? Jackson's fingers tightened around the apple, and in that moment he knew he couldn't stay on the sidelines anymore. He began pushing his cart slowly through the store, but this time he didn't just walk. He stopped, and he asked. Near the dairy aisle he approached an elderly woman with soft silver hair who was reaching for a carton of milk. His voice was calm, genuine. Do you usually shop here, ma'am? She smiled gently. Every week. It's close to home. Convenient, really, but it gets tiring, you know? There's nowhere to sit, not even for a minute. In the bread aisle, another older man crouched to compare prices. His voice was low, almost apologetic. There used to be someone who helped me with my groceries. Now no one does that. I fell out in the parking lot. Took nearly 30 minutes before anyone even noticed. Jackson didn't say a word. He didn't need to. They weren't angry. They weren't complaining. They were just accepting. And that quiet acceptance, that was what shook him the most. Because when customers stop expecting kindness, it means the heart of the store has already begun to rot from within. Jackson found an old bench tucked in the corner of an aisle and sat down. He pretended to check his shopping list, but his mind was spiraling. Every word he'd just heard, every glance, every silence, it all pieced together into a truth too big to ignore. He pulled out his phone and opened a note from years ago. At the very top, bold and unmissable, were the words, Harvesttown Market, where customers are treated like family. He let out a long, unfiltered sigh. Not from fatigue, but from the weight of accountability that had slowly piled onto his shoulders over the years. When had that mission become just a slogan? He looked around. Employees were still busy, checking inventory, restocking shelves, scanning items. Every task done by the book. But no one was smiling. No one was making eye contact. Jackson realized something undeniable. If he stayed silent, if he kept watching, he would be complicit in the very culture he had once been proud to create. And he couldn't. Not for one more day. He stood, no longer quietly blending into the crowd, no longer slow or unsure. Jackson began walking with purpose through every section of the store, engaging with both customers and staff alike. He asked, "Have you been trained to assist elderly customers? If someone falls outside, are you allowed to leave your station to help them?" And the answers kept repeating. "I'm not sure. I think we're not supposed to. I'd have to ask a manager first." One young employee finally said it plainly. "Honestly, we just stick to our jobs here. Doing anything more gets called acting on your own." Jackson didn't argue. He just quietly scribbled everything down into a small notebook, each sentence carving deeper into the vision he once believed in. And in that moment, he knew it was no longer time to ask. It was time to speak. When the store's clock struck 5:00 p.m., Jackson stepped out of the aisle and made his way to the service counter. He asked to see the manager. Greg, still dressed in his pristine white shirt, emerged with his usual professional demeanor. He seemed slightly caught off guard by how calm this customer remained. "Is there anything else I can help you with, sir?" Greg asked with a practiced smile. Jackson nodded, his tone slow but unwavering. "I'd like to meet with the entire staff. In the break room, right after closing." Greg raised an eyebrow, puzzled. "May I ask what this is regarding?" Jackson looked him straight in the eye. "Something important. Something that all of us here have forgotten. And I, the one most responsible, need to be the first to face it." Greg started to speak again, but Jackson was already walking away. No one in the store knew it yet. But everything was about to change. The store had closed. The bright overhead lights dimmed, replaced by the soft amber glow of the break room. Every employee had been gathered, about a dozen in total. Some stood, some sat. All wore expressions tinged with curiosity and doubt. Then Jackson entered. No cart, no ball cap, just himself, calm, composed, and resolute. He removed his cap and placed it gently on the table. Silence fell like a curtain. "I'd like to introduce myself," he said, voice even but firm. "I'm not a customer." Eyes shifted. Murmurs died in throats. The room's atmosphere changed. "My name is Jackson. I'm the founder of Harvesttown Market." The weight of that revelation slammed into the room like a silent thunderclap. Greg froze. Ethan's eyes widened. Several employees instinctively took a step back, as if confronted with a truth too large to process. Jackson didn't raise his voice, but every word he spoke landed like a stone dropped into still water. "I'm not here to evaluate anyone. I'm here to apologize." Still, no one moved. No one spoke. Jackson stepped toward the center of the room, his voice now low, grounded, and intentional. "I built this store, this chain, from nothing. I stacked the first boxes, I cleaned the first shelves, and I believed in something simple. We don't just sell goods, we serve people." He looked around, making eye contact with each face. But today, I saw Mr. Walter, a frail, elderly man living alone, struggling in the parking lot with a bag of food for his dog Milo. And no one helped him. Greg looked down. Ethan's eyes fell to the floor. But Jackson didn't accuse. He simply exhaled, soft and heavy with regret. "Not because any of you are unkind, but because I built a system. that no longer allows you to be. Slowly, eyes began to lift, not in fear, but in something else, something deeper, empathy. This wasn't a reprimand. This was a confession, and every person in the room was a witness. Jackson looked down at his hands, as if he could still feel the weight of the crates he once lifted decades ago. When I was 19, he began, voice low and steady. I worked at a little store in Kansas. My first winter there, I had to push carts through the snow, bare hands, freezing wind cutting into my skin. No one helped, not because they were cruel, but because everyone was busy. He looked up, his voice deepened. That kind of cold, it doesn't just cut your skin, it cuts into your chest. And today, when I saw Mr. Walter, I didn't just see a customer. I saw myself 30 years ago. Alone, quiet, invisible. Around the room, several employees lowered their heads, not in shame, but because something real was rising inside them. Not fear, but empathy. And in that moment, Jackson felt it, hope, stirring gently in the silence. Then Ethan spoke, voice trembling with sincerity. "Mr. Walter, I see him every week, but I always thought someone else would help." The room stilled. Not a sound. Not even a breath out of place. All eyes turned toward the young man. No one laughed. No one judged. Only a quiet understanding began to fill the air. Slow and powerful. An older female employee spoke next, her voice barely above a whisper. "I once helped an elderly woman with her groceries, walked her to her car. Got called into HR right after. Since then, I just stopped." Jackson didn't interrupt. He simply nodded. No anger, no disappointment. Just listening. Then another voice cut through the stillness. "I've got a pickup truck. Next week, if Mr. Walter needs a ride, I'll drive him home." From those small confessions, something beautiful began to flow, like streams of water breaking through the ice. No one had been instructed, no one had been pushed, but slowly, quietly, the room felt human again. Because all it ever needed was someone brave enough to begin. Jackson stepped over to the bulletin board on the wall, covered in schedules, sales quotas, performance goals, service time metrics. Old, mechanical, impersonal. He pulled down a plain sheet of paper and held it up, not denying that efficiency matters. But if chasing numbers causes us to forget an old man with trembling hands out in the parking lot, then what we're protecting is no longer success. He folded the paper carefully and placed it on the table, like a vow offered in silence. "I'm not here to change everything in one night. I'm here to start over with the simplest thing we've forgotten. Kindness." The air in the room shifted, slowed, softened. People began to glance at one another, not with guarded eyes, but with reflection. We don't need a new policy to bend down and help someone. We just need to remember we're allowed to care. Across the room, Greg, the store manager, slowly nodded. No defensiveness, no rebuttal, just a quiet, honest agreement. Jackson stepped back into the center of the room. His voice now carried clarity, strength, purpose. "Starting next week, our entire chain will launch a new initiative. People first." Every head turned. "We'll form an internal volunteer team. Employees willing to assist elderly customers, people with disabilities, or anyone who simply needs a helping hand. And let me be clear, no one will ever be reprimanded again for being kind." Ethan smiled gently. The middle-aged woman who had once been punished for helping finally nodded. And this time, her eyes glowed with something that had long been missing. Trust. Jackson continued, "I don't want this to just live on paper. So tomorrow, I'll be here with all of you, stocking shelves, lining up carts, helping wherever help is needed. Because if the founder can still kneel down to serve, then none of us is too busy to look up and see another human being. The next morning, the store opened just as it always had, but something inside felt unmistakably different. Jackson stood in the produce section, wearing a simple apron and a handwritten name tag. Jackson, customer support. He was stacking tomatoes, his movements slow, careful, deliberate. An elderly man approached, asking softly where the paper bags were. Jackson turned to him, smiled, and said, "Let me show you, sir." At the service counter, Ethan was guiding an older woman through the self-checkout machine. No more hesitation. No more fear of doing the wrong thing. The feeling of dog ahead of him slowly moved off the bench, and he wished he worked alone or on the lower level, where death gutted the bench near the front doors, the one that had collected dust for years. Today, he wiped it clean with his own hands, and for the first time in a long while, someone sat on it. No one said anything. No one stopped them. Only the peaceful silence of a store rediscovering its purpose filled the air. It had all begun again with the smallest of acts. Later that afternoon, Jackson pulled up in front of a modest home at the edge of town. The front yard was blanketed with golden leaves. The fence stood weathered by time. The front door was slightly ajar, as if waiting for someone. He stepped out of the car with 2 grocery bags. Inside, dog food, fresh milk, whole grain bread, and a folded letter. Mr. Walter opened the door. He paused when he saw Jackson. "Waited. It's you, from the other day." Jackson smiled and handed him the bags. "I said I'd come back. And this time, I didn't come empty-handed." Mr. Walter took the bags slowly. From inside, Milo came padding out, tail wagging, letting out a soft bark as he circled both men like a welcome only dogs can give. Jackson handed over a final piece of paper. "This is confirmation for 6 months of free home deliveries. And if you ever need more than that, just call." No tears. No speeches. Just a handshake, firm, honest, and deeply human. The following week, across every Harvest Town market location, something quiet began to take root. At every entrance, a new sign now stood. People first, always. In one store, a young employee paused mid-sweep to help an elderly woman push her cart across the lot. No one called him back. Instead, the manager stepped out, gave him a single nod, silent approval worth more than words. Across the company's internal network, messages began flooding in. "We just helped an old man who fell off his bike. We started a support group for elderly customers. We feel like we're actually serving again." In his office, Jackson sat alone, quietly reading every message. He didn't reply. He simply printed each one and pinned them all to the largest whiteboard in the meeting room. Not for display, not for accolades, but as a reminder that a single small change made at just the right moment can awaken an entire system that had forgotten how to feel. Night had fallen. From the outside, the top floor of the building still glowed softly, a warm light cutting through the darkness like a steady heartbeat. Inside, Jackson sat by the window, alone. His gaze wandered out over the shimmering lights of the city, as if searching for something long lost or just rediscovered. In front of him sat a steaming cup of tea and an old leather-bound notebook, edges worn, spine cracked, the very place where he once scribbled his earliest dreams. He opened it. The first page revealed a faded line of ink, almost lost to time. "Begin with trust, build with kindness." He stared at it, silent. How far had he drifted from those simple truths? Years of growth, expansion, profit, awards. All hard-earned. But now, he understood something he hadn't before. No success is worth pride if the path to it left too many people behind. Walter, Milo, Ethan, Reg, the dust-covered bench, the silent eyes of forgotten customers. Each had become a teacher, each a mirror, and together they revealed a lesson as old as time. Success often makes us forget, but people, they don't need our pity. They just need to be seen. Early morning. The sky was painted in pale blue, brushed with soft light. Sunlight stretched across the parking lot of the Maplebrook store. Mr. Walter pulled in slowly, steady hands on the wheel, but he didn't need to get out. A young employee was already approaching with a cart, smiling, offering a warm hello. From the back seat, Milo stuck his head out the window, tongue lolling, tail wagging softly, as if the world finally felt safe again. Inside, Ethan was assisting an elderly customer at the dairy aisle, helping her choose sugar-free milk. Greg walked past, gave him a gentle pat on the shoulder. No reminder, no warning, just a calm, quiet smile. The old, faded sign near the entrance had been replaced, but the words remained the same. Customers are the heart of the store. Only now, it wasn't just a slogan. It was something you could see in the way people walked, in the way they looked at each other, in the way they slowed down, just enough to notice. Jackson stood near the door, saying nothing. No need to be recognized, no need to be known. Because what mattered most wasn't that they saw him. It was that people had finally begun to see each other. Maybe you've seen someone like Mr. Walter before, sitting by the roadside with heavy bags, struggling with a cart in the rain, standing quietly in a crowd, hoping for a single kind glance. We live in a fast world, everyone rushing, everyone with somewhere to be. But sometimes, 3 seconds of pause is all it takes to make someone feel not forgotten. Jackson couldn't change the world by himself, but his actions, a sincere apology, a timely delivery, a quiet reminder of kindness, sent a ripple through a place that had grown too quiet. Because the question has never been, you have enough power to change the world. The real question is, are you willing to see the people the world has forgotten to notice? This story isn't just about Mr. Walter. It's not just about a CEO going undercover. It's about all of us. Anyone who's ever walked past someone without truly seeing them. You might not run a grocery store. You might not lead a company. But you do have the one thing every change needs. A choice. You can choose to keep walking. Or you can stop. You can stay silent. Or you can begin with just one question. Can I help you? We're telling this story not to ask for praise, but to ask for memory. If, at any point in this story, you saw yourself as Jackson, as Walter, as Ethan, or simply as someone who once stood silently at the sidelines, leave a comment. Say, I've seen it too. Because a kinder world doesn't begin with a policy. It begins with the first glance that refuses to look away. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Moments of Quiet Truth, where we believe that the human spirit is never truly defeated, only waiting to rise.